Welcome to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good. And we love talking about leadership and corporate culture and so much more. We are joined by Brad Federman. He is the CEO of PerformancePoint and also the author of Cultivating Culture, 101 Ways to Foster Engagement in 15 Minutes or Less. Brad, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we are honored to have you. We get to dive into leadership and culture and this world of HR and everything that you are so heavily engaged in. For starters, give us a little bit of your background. Give us a little bit of context around PerformancePoint.
Sure. I've been doing this work for years. I actually worked internally and externally for years. I started with Accenture doing change management work. And I actually came to Memphis for work, ended up staying. And at some point in time, I had a choice whether I would leave or I would stay. And in order to stay, I really felt like the best way for me to stay was to start my own company. I'd done it for other people. I'd worked for other people. And I felt like what was happening in the training and HR world was that they were stuck. We were stuck in the 70s and 80s when it came to models and research, and the workplace looked so different, right? And so my mission was to bring forward ideas that were relevant to today's workplace and to make sure that we maintain that as we move forward. And so that built into PerformancePoint. I literally have a mission behind me. You can't see it because I have a backdrop behind me that says, it reminds us every day of why we're here. It is inspiring others to discover and live their possible. And that's what drives us. And we do that by focusing on three core areas. One is, how do we engage people? How do we engage customers? How do we engage employees? Second one is, how do we build resilient relationships that stand the test of time, that stand the difficult moments, right? Because we are tested, we are challenged. And then the third one really is about, how do we create agile, collaborative cultures that help us change with the speed at which things are changing in today's environment. And that's really where we spend a lot of our time and we focus our energies.
You're a big part of SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management. You do so much on that side, sharing your expertise. How do you contextualize where we are in the environment currently with HR? Because you have all these things kind of colliding with the pandemic, remote workforce, now a hybrid workforce coming back in. There's a lot of things to navigate. How do you kind of paint the picture of where we are today with both the challenges, but also the opportunities?
Well, I do talk about it being the tale of two worlds. I think that you open up the magazines and the paper, and depending on which ones you open up, you either hear that the sky is falling and everything is going to be a mess, right? Or you hear, man, it's awesome. Remote work's fantastic. People love it. And the truth is, it's both, right? There are people that are working at home who are truly enjoying it and they're flourishing. There are also people who are so introverted that they've removed themselves from their teams and they're not interacting and they're not collaborating. And you've got extroverted people who are going crazy because they don't have the social capability they used to have and they can't take it anymore. They don't like being on the island, right? So you've got the best and the worst happening at the same time. And I also think you've got some very interesting dynamics that people don't think about. I think this is both an exciting time and a frightening time for a lot of HR folks. So what do I mean by that? You've got this push for things like 4-day work weeks, right? But a lot of companies have to work their people 50 to 80 hours a week because we are struggling with a labor shortage, right? You want consistency and predictability, but with vaccine mandates and legislation and OSHA, it's changing and has been changing on a daily basis. And so I think HR has this almost impossible task to try and make the dichotomy of what's happening out there work. Now that it offers a fantastic challenge for people that want to rise to it. But for a lot of people, I think there are a lot of HR folks that right now are probably burnt out themselves and they're struggling.
Yeah, and I think it's always good to have that sort of picture in the grand scheme, but also looking at it, like you said, in both the challenges and the opportunities. What led you to write this book? Because I like the fact that you have 101 ways to foster engagement. And I like that you also tie it in 15 minutes or less. So, straight to the point, let's get to the action items. Let's make it, something that you can put into place and be proactive. But what led you to write this book?
What led me to write this book was twofold. One, we did a lot of work in this area with clients. And so it's something we knew and we knew well. But more importantly, I see the organization and the world changing. I mean, the hierarchy is dying. Organizations are flatter. They're more networked. They're distributed workforces that are much more diverse. And we have a lot of outside forces, politics, social media, driving behavior and different understandings of the world. And so a different approach to culture is needed. It used to be that we would use a very leader-driven approach. Leaders told you what the culture was. It was sitting on your wall. It was on a placard or a poster. It was on your website. It was very event-based. It was pushed through the organization. And then there was an expectation that we would live it. Most of the time, we would fall very short, right? We've all talked about the culture on the wall versus the espoused culture versus the real culture. And we could get away with that more in the past than we can now. We live in a world where we have so much more diversity and all of our norms are gone, right? And what is culture? Culture is a shared set of beliefs. It's a set of norms, set of values. Well, when you're walking down the street and you open the door for one person, like I've done this for one woman, and I've been called a male chauvinist, then I've opened the door for another one and I've been told thank you, right? The truth is, depending on who it is, you don't know what their expectations and their values and their norms are. And so in a world where we are so uniquely different and diverse, we've got to find ways to drive that culture. And we can't use the hierarchy anymore. Can't use leaders anymore. And time is like this. We've got TikTok, social media, attention spans are short. So we wrote the book with the intention of saying culture is a living and breathing thing. It needs to be something that is revisited consistently, woven into the fabric of your organization and the way you operate. And it needs to be facilitated so that people understand how it supports the role, how it supports the organization, how it supports your customers, but more importantly, how it supports you all working together productively as a team. And so the book is built to be a practical how-to that can be put into a leader, supervisor, manager's, team lead's hands. And they can use that as a coach, as a facilitator, not as a manager, but a coach and facilitator to facilitate a conversation, to drive a conversation that's multi-pronged, two-way, that creates that sense of understanding and connections between people so that we can walk down this road together.
So obviously we're not going to give away all of them because we want you as the listener or the viewer to buy the book, but
please.
let's dive into some of these is some fun, conversation points, but also too sharing some of your tips and recommendations. And let's start with on this idea of building culture. And obviously you can take it in a lot of ways, but as we talked about before, you're dealing in a hybrid world where culture is now not necessarily physical proximity. Now it's remote workforce. It's people who have different cultural norms, especially if your workforce is spread out geographically across the world. So there's a lot of things that now come into play when you talk about building culture. Give us one or two of your favorite recommendations around how do you build culture in today's environment?
Well, the first thing I think you have to do is you have to recognize that you have to start a dialogue. Culture is built through understanding. I can tell you something and I can give you the answer, but that doesn't mean that it makes any sense to you, right? When I was a young child and I was in math class, our teacher gave us a special problem. And two people in the class figured out the answer to the problem. It's myself and a friend of mine named Neil. And the next question she asked was, how did you get there? Do you understand how it worked? Now, I was able to get there, but I didn't understand how it worked. Neil understood how it worked. And that told her Neil was ready to move on, right? I was ready to move on a little bit. And everybody else had to learn more and engage more to be able to understand how that all worked and how to do it. And what that meant was there was work to be done. And I think the first thing we have to remember is culture is not built through an event or a moment. It's built through a constant conversation. I would say my biggest tips to you are that a mission should never be something that is not revisited. It should be revisited on a regular basis, and your values should be revisited on a regular basis. So when I say people at this organization are respected, are our most valuable resource, whatever the value is that people say, I'll go into those companies and I'll say, great. When do you talk about that? And most of them say, what do you mean? I'll say, well, tell me what's an agenda to your meeting? You know, when you meet with your team, when you meet as a company, what do you talk about? And it's amazing. People talk about problems. They talk about issues. They talk about resources. They talk about all kinds of things, but they don't talk about people. So hold on. If people are your value, if you say that you respect them more than anything, and yet you never talk about them, you never discuss how are people doing? Are we working well together as a team? Is there anybody we should be concerned about, right? If we're not having those conversations, then is that really a value of ours, right? So we should be talking about that on a regular basis. Our mission, I told you a moment ago, was inspiring others to discover and live their possible. I believe that with a passion, and so much so that I don't feel like we can do that for other people if we're not doing it for ourselves. So I can tell you that we had a meeting a few months back, and in our meeting, I said, you know, we talk about inspiring others to discover and live their possible. Let's talk about ourselves. And I gave everybody a homework assignment. Everyone in the company had to think about what their possible was, right? What do they want? What's next for them? And then they were asked to ask another question, which is, how can any of us support you in that journey? And we sat back and had a conversation about that in our meeting, and we talked about that. So if we're going to do it for customers, we should do it for ourselves. But we revisited that mission and made it real. It came alive and it became local for each one of us. And it became paramount that each one of us had a support system to help them. And we all were able to sign up to do that. Now that's building a culture. If we, and I can't ask other people to do it if we're not going to do it ourselves, right? So I think the key is you have to build time in to be able to have those conversations and revisit those important things that we take for granted. And that's why we wrote the book. So you could do that in 10, 15-minute increments. That's digestible. That's possible. It doesn't have to be a retreat. It doesn't have to be half day. It doesn't have to be 2 days. It can be 10 minutes.
I like the fact too, because one of the other things that I've noticed is, especially with Zoom and the work from home, and everybody's so busy and transactional now, where it's like, it's all business. It's all just, lightning fast. Let's move in, let's move out. Let's keep going this over here. You lose the water cooler talk, the personal talk, you lose the bonding moments, you lose the, hey, how was the vacation? How was this? How are you doing over here? And so just giving yourself time to focus on each other as humans, to build those relationships and show that you're important, your people are important. Those moments, like you say, of just pouring in and saying, how can we develop? How can we help you achieve your purpose? All of that kind of stuff to me goes back to fueling that culture conversation. I want to go back to, you mentioned a flat hierarchy is another trend. How can everyone play a role? Because now everyone does play a role in culture. Everyone is responsible. Talk about why everyone's responsible and how everyone can be a part of culture building.
Sure. I think it's interesting. We are more influenced and impacted in many cases by our peers than we are by our managers. That's different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. If you asked who the most important relationship was, it was the manager. If you look at the recent research, that's no longer true, which means that your coworkers not only affect the culture of the team, they affect whether you're willing to stay and whether you're willing to go, right? That's huge, huge impact. And so what I would say is that a way to think about this is that the behaviors that we accept for ourselves and for those that we work with define our culture. That's who we are. And every single person plays a role. And in many cases, your teammates play a much larger role in that than your manager does. So everybody needs to role model culture. Everybody needs to pay attention to other people. Everybody needs to pay attention to inclusion issues. Everyone needs to be paying attention to being customer focused. And we have to find ways to make that real within our roles and express that on a regular basis, right? So if we actually have that conversation as a teammate, regardless of who's facilitating that conversation, which is sometimes a manager, sometimes it's a colleague. Regardless of who's facilitating it, I have something to share. And hopefully I have something to share that is demonstrating that I'm living and breathing that culture and supporting it. Because if I'm not, I'm more damaging in some ways than my manager not doing it. And that is a huge lesson for people to learn. I worked with one high-tech company, and they had beautiful values all over the walls. And yet it wasn't lived. When there was a problem, it wasn't uncommon for people to yell at each other, scream at each other, curse at each other, berate one another. And it was a terrible situation. They were losing money. People weren't willing to help the company. They were struggling. And we instituted a 3 strikes you're out rule. Basically, the first time you do something like that, which breaks the values that are on your wall, you get a warning. And the second time you get training and a coach. And the third time you're gone. And all it took was one person to leave because they weren't living the culture, and everybody else got into it. Everybody else started living the culture. And what was interesting was in 1 year, they had an $11 million shift to the positive, because instead of people being angry with each other, not working as a team, sabotaging one another, people started to chip in. That's the power of an individual driving culture. In fact, I use the phrase, this is the phrase I use: culture is to recruiting and retention as food is to hunger. And people right now are hungry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway in terms of everyone playing a role now, and the power of your peers, not just the managers and supervisors, and obviously all the way up to the CEO. Share a tip or two around remote workers, and how do you build culture through this remote work environment?
I think I would say 2 things. One is, I think that people are using the remote work environment as an excuse. When we first started going remote, people paid special attention because we had never done it before. And there were questions: can we pull this off? And so you had managers having one-on-ones with employees. You had happy hours with the team. People played games. There was this real sense of let's connect. And somewhere along the line, I think maybe it's stress, fear, anxiety, all kinds of things. People put their heads down and they just started grinding. And there's only so long you can do that until there's burnout. And we forgot about some of the things that we had done, maybe a little too much in the beginning, but we need a little bit of it now. And quite frankly, if we do some of it, it'll save us time. We don't realize that. So, when you talk about your mission, your values, your culture, I said it was a shared set of beliefs and behaviors that they determine how we act, how we behave, what we work on, what we decide to work on. They decide our priorities. When we stop and we just grind and we get caught up in the day-to-day tasks, and we're no longer able to strategically prioritize what we're doing because we don't have a broader culture and direction that's being presented to us on a regular basis, we end up working harder, faster on so many things, doing nothing really well, but doing a lot of things okay. When if we had these conversations, even if they were 10 minutes at a time, even if they're over Zoom, we would say, that's not producing impact. Why are we spending our time there? Stop working on that. Let's focus on this. And if we actually had a little bit more focus, we would have a much better work-life balance, even working from home. The greatest leaders, the greatest organizations, and the greatest teams know something, which is in order to say yes to one thing, we have to say no to several others. Are we doing that? We're not doing that if we're not revisiting our culture. The second thing I'll say is I'm more concerned about people coming back. We've got this huge return to, they call it work. I hate that phrase, return to work. Everybody's been working. Return to the office, as I'm going to use. We have a return to the office promotion going on right now. And the problem we have is that the office does 2 things. It takes away people's sense of freedom, right? So now I feel watched. I'm going back in the office. when I get there, people are paying attention to. When I leave, people are paying attention to. What's on my desk, people are paying attention to. That stops people's sense of being able to just work and get things done in a productive way. They become more concerned with what other people are thinking and feeling. And most organizations have thought about desk sizes, space, sanitizers, all kinds of things like that. What they haven't thought about is, how do we make the office a place of camaraderie and culture building? And I think that is not only a shame, and a lost opportunity. It's going to create problems. There are a lot of people that don't want to come back. So if they don't want to come back, and now I'm coming back and I feel a sense of being watched, right? Like it used to be. And I don't feel like there's a real reason for me to be there, then I'm creating a problem, which is I'm either going to create more turnover, or I'll keep people, which is even more dangerous. Always the phrase I use is, you may have the bodies, but how many souls have left the building? That's my biggest concern going forward. And I think companies need to think about how they want to use their space to build camaraderie, collaboration, and culture. And if they haven't thought about it, they need to do it now.
Yeah. Just tons of good advice. Tie this to community service, volunteerism, engagement, corporate philanthropy. When you talk about getting your team mobilized out in the community, serving with nonprofits, to me, there's so much power in that for culture building, but in leadership development, how does that play a role in this larger conversation around culture?
I think it plays a huge role. And it also plays a huge role in terms of retention of people. People aren't quitting because, and it's amazing, we have this conversation about people quitting because of money, but all the research is showing they're not quitting because of money. They're quitting because they have no work-life balance. They're quitting because they want flexibility. And they're quitting because they want meaning and purpose in their work. So I think there's two things that you need to do. One is you need to tie their daily work to something bigger than just getting tasks done, to just selling widgets. I've got to be doing this in some way that betters my community or someone's life, right? And the second thing is, getting people involved with the community is also a way of creating a sense of meaning in their work and in their work life. And I think that's key. So I think it becomes part of your culture as a company if you really invest in it and you value it. Now, that means that you can't say, we're going to do this event, right? And it's this fun thing we do, but we're really not committed. And once the event's over, we're going to go back to business as usual. If you're going to get involved with the community, it's because you have a heartfelt passion for it, and it needs to be authentic. People can tell the difference today, and they're not going to put up with it. So
you are 100% correct. Exactly. Man, we could go on forever on this. So let's wrap up though. We'll have you come back for sure, and we'll dive in deeper on a lot more of these topics, but wrap up with where we can go to carry this conversation forward. So your website, social media, where would we go to learn more about obviously the book and Performance Point? Where do we go?
Sure. Okay. Well, this is what you can't even see it on that screen because the backdrop. It's called Cultivating Culture, and the book is available at every major bookseller. It's at Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, you name it. You can reach us at PerformancePoint LLC.com and learn more about who we are and what we do. We're all over LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Both myself and the company. Join our group, join our company page, follow me, connect with me. I'm happy to do it. Love doing it. I like to hear from people, I like to start conversations. I think it's really important that we get more people a part of these conversations. And I'd love to continue it because, quite frankly, Jeremy, I think this is important. I'm going to leave you with a quote that I think is profound. This is why I think not only the book is important, but I think culture in companies is important. We live in a polarized society. We are segregating ourselves in every aspect of our lives, from where we eat, socialize, pray, even in our online experiences. But it's a way for people to seek comfort, but that seeking comfort does not lead to growth. It only leads to decay. And the workplace is one of the last vestiges of diverse thought and range of backgrounds. We must preserve that experience because if we preserve that experience, we're going to preserve civility, competitiveness, and our way of life. The truth is we're on one team in our organization. And if we can build that sense of civility, shared norms in our company, then we can spread that into our communities. If we don't, our communities and some of the things that we're seeing in our communities that are disruptive and divisive will end up seeping into our organization. So we have a choice. We take it seriously, not just for our company, but for something broader, or we let what's out there define who we are.
Well, tons of good stuff, and we'll definitely have you come back on and we'll dive even deeper into these topics. But Brad, thank you for all you and your amazing team do. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.